This follows a report that was done by Pascalinah Kabi and Sechaba Moketi, basically looking at the various threats facing the media in Lesotho. This could be political threats, legal threats, economic threats, and so forth. And there were a number of issues that came out there, including the legal threats that are quite prevalent in Lesotho. And well, this is basically our fifth such webinar. The first one we held was for Mozambique, we've done South Africa, we've done Botswana, we've also done Zimbabwe, and basically there were a number of issues that came. Some of the issues that we'll discuss today are quite similar to those that we found elsewhere. That is, we found in the other countries that I'm talking about. But each country has its own unique challenges. Hence, today we're discussing Lesotho. We've got a number of people, panelists, who will help us to look at these issues and also come up. We are hoping that we're not just discussing, but we want to come out with possible solutions. We also want to come up with possible areas for partnerships, possible areas for collaboration, possible areas for advocacy. And these partnerships, we don't know what form or shape they'll take. It could be partnerships in training. It could be and some other forms of capacity building. As colleagues would know, maybe some colleagues on this platform would know that Interwatch did conduct a training for journalists in the SADC region in South Africa 2 years ago. Then this was followed up by country visits where we had our journalism director who is here with us, Herbert, going visiting a number of countries, including Lesotho, where there was in-house training. So we are hoping, we are taking this forward so that we identify gaps together and we prescribe a solution together, and hopefully then we can have partnerships going forward in terms of advocacy, in terms of training, and so forth. And today, to help us really tackle the issues that are at hand, we have Advocate Sibongile, Advocate Sibongile Mokapanesi. I'm not so sure if I'm pronouncing that one correctly, Advocate. If I've pronounced it wrongly, please forgive me. We also have my friend Billy Ntaote. Billy is an investigative journalist of note and is with the MNN Center in Lesotho. We have Majirata Latela. Majirata is she's a hard-hitting journalist. She's an international journalist. She has also been involved in initiatives, women in journalism initiatives, and we're hoping to discuss a number of issues. And you'll find that the report does talk about threats that are peculiar to women, gendered threats, and so forth. So I'm glad to have you here. We also have Selloane Nyakane, who is the MISA Lesotho Secretary General. I'm aware that MISA Lesotho has been involved in quite a lot of advocacy, including around issues of media laws and so forth. So we're hoping to hear more from you, Selloane, about the initiatives and everything else around the media space. Yeah, maybe to start off, I will kindly ask Pascalinah. Pascalinah, could you please share what your findings were before I invite the panelists to properly introduce themselves and go into the meat and bones of this webinar?
Thank you so much, Owen, and greetings, colleagues. As Owen has rightly introduced me, my name is Pascalinah Kabi. I am the co-author of the report on mapping threats to the media in Lesotho. I wrote the report with Sechaba Moketi. I would like to indicate our findings by narrating a story that I think it would be easier for all of us to understand in practical sense what these threats mean to us as the media and the general public in Lesotho. So I'll narrate the story by indicating that some of this is a fiction, it's not reality. So Ntswaki is a 25-year-old a civil servant who has just joined the civil service in the Ministry of Justice. She is an advocate for child protection. A few months after she joined the ministry, she discovers a hidden report about child trafficking. She has 7 or 6 alternatives. First, to contact a reporter, a journalist, and share the report with. But her challenge is there is no law in Lesotho protecting whistleblowing. So when she shares that report, she basically is putting her life in danger. She could be fired, she could be jailed because she is not protected in law. That is one finding of her report, which indicates the threats that the media in Lesotho is facing. In the absence of the law that protects the whistleblower, we are in a situation where the government of Lesotho wants to introduce a law that makes whistleblowing illegal. So Ntswaki is now faced with a dilemma that I'm not protected, but at the same time, there's a possibility that in future, I'll not be able to share this information. That is another challenge or the threat that we have identified in our report. She has another alternative. Maybe I can tell Billy that there is this particular report that you can find out about and write an expose. But Billy has a challenge on his part because in Lesotho, there is no law that allows Billy to access that information. So that is another dilemma or another threat that journalists in Lesotho are facing because Lesotho is one of the very few countries that doesn't have a law that gives people protection and accessing the information. So Billy eventually Ntswaki decides, I do not have a problem with being endangered. Maybe I would be fired, but I'm going ahead anyway and share the information with Billy. Billy works for a platinum newspaper. He writes the story, does everything that a journalist is supposed to be doing to do the story. Eventually, he submits the story to the editor, and the story stays in the server for 3 months without being published. That is another dilemma that we are facing, that in a case where the journalist is brave enough, there are now revenue connotations that prevent publishers to go ahead with sensitive stories that may put their publications in a bad side with the government, which is the biggest advertiser in Lesotho. They may say, because you expose this, we may not be able to put advertising with you in future. Sometimes they don't necessarily say, but that is the general feeling that one sees that this time around I'm not getting as many advertising as I used to. Previously, we've had the government, the administration, I think it was around between 2014 and 26, between 2015 and 2017, where it was explicitly stated that a certain publication shouldn't be given advertising because it was publishing materials that the government felt it was against that particular administration. So after Billy realizes that this story is not going anywhere, my publisher is not going to go ahead and publish the story, he decides that I'm going to give this story to ABC radio station because they're very brave, they're anti-government, they will publish the story anyway. So the radio station goes ahead and publishes that particular story. And the government is unhappy with that. And there is nothing legal that the government can use against this particular radio station in connection with that particular story. So they look for something else and they decide, let's close this radio station as punishment. But they use a leg that it is not meeting the legal requirements, or maybe it has not renewed its license and all those that. That is another challenge that we are facing. We saw this happening with a 357 FM when it was closed down because the journalist had written critical information about stolen firearms. And the government found a loophole on how to close that radio station. That is another challenge that we have found through our research with Chaba for Intel Watch, that the Lesotho Communications Authority is not autonomous. So politicians are using it to punish dissenting voices. So that is another challenge or another finding in our report. Suppose the radio station, or suppose the LCA did not close the radio station. It kept quiet and it said, no, let's not go that far. Another dilemma that we are facing, according to the findings of our report, is the safety of the journalist. So Billy goes ahead. The story is published. The expose, now we know what is happening with child trafficking, the number of children that were trafficked, who was behind, why were they protected, and all that. But Billy feels he's not safe. And maybe Billy is followed and attacked. That is what we saw with the late Lekashasha. Yes, there are many theories around how he was killed, why he was killed, but at the end of the day, there's also that theory that he was killed because he was investigating issues around the government properties that have been allocated to the wrong hands. So that is another dilemma or another threat that the Lesotho media is facing. Now, Billy is not killed. All these other threats that I have put across, they have not happened. Now there is a member of the public that I will name maybe Hosi. Hosi sees the story. He goes through the story and now he starts sharing the story on social media using the findings of the report and also throwing in his own opinion into the story. We have the Internal Security Act, which talks to subversive. If the authorities feel very strong about Hosi's opinion, he can also be in trouble. So the challenge doesn't only stay with the media. It cuts across in Lesotho. Whoever wants to exercise their freedom to have access to information, they are also in trouble. So those are our findings. I don't know if, Owen, you want me to talk about the recommendations based on these very serious challenges that we have come across. What are we proposing should be done? Do you want me to go ahead with or later on?
No. Yeah, we'll jointly look at possible solutions with everyone else later. Yeah. But
Okay,
thank you so much, Pascalinah, for sharing your main findings. And even if one hasn't read the report, you can. We now know that whistleblowers are not protected in Lesotho, and in fact, not only that, it gets worse. There are plans to make whistleblowing illegal. There's no access to information laws in Lesotho, unlike in many other countries in the region. The government is the biggest advertiser, and that's the same across the region. And sometimes they can use that to punish media houses whom they think are not giving them good coverage. And there's also concern that the authorities can just withdraw licenses in Lesotho, like the case of 357 AF, 357 FM, and that the Lesotho Communications Authority is not autonomous. There's also concern around the safety of journalists, and these are a big concerns because we have that 2023 killing of a fellow journalist. We also have the 2016 shooting of an editor, Lloyd Mutungamiri. Um, so these are worrying and issues, and which show that maybe the safety of journalists is a really, really a big issue. There's also a plethora of laws in Lesotho, as we saw in your report, that are anti-journalism or that militate against investigative journalism, and in fact, any form of journalism for that matter. So, given this background, I now want to invite our panelists to come in. And before I do that, I just want to say this is a free platform. Colleagues are free to ask questions. Colleagues are free to make their own contributions. So you can just raise your hands, and I will be able to ask you to speak, or you can just write your question or your comment, and I can read it out. So it's a space where we're all free to contribute. Yeah. So I'm going to start with the advocate. Um, the report speaks about a number of laws that are there, which are militating against journalism. It also speaks about certain laws that should be there that are not there, like the blowing laws and so forth. So, advocate, can you please come in and share with us your thoughts on the laws in Lesotho?
Thank you very much, Owen. Once again, good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Sibongile Mokapanesi. I'm a digital rights advocate, and I'm here just to clarify in my personal capacity. So my opinions that I might share today in my personal capacity are not associated with my current employer. But just to delve into what Owen has set the floor for me is that basically, just like in any other, democratic state, our Constitution of 1999, under Chapter 2, which actually enlists and acknowledges around 16 fundamental human rights, acknowledges the right to freedom of expression, which entails the right to express opinion and views, as well as the right to receive information and ideas. And this sort of like is a standing and founding principle of the right itself, that the state is bound to protect this right for every one of its citizens. But in the same breath, the very same constitution under section 14, subsection 2, sort of like pulls that very same thing by limiting the right. So it says, hey, you have the right to freedom. You can exercise this. But in the same hand, it also says, but, and puts a condition to it. I think maybe just going forward, we might also want to, at the back of our head, sort of like reflect on what the international standard when it comes to limiting rights is, particularly how justifiable limiting the right to freedom of expression can look like. So there's the Johannesburg Principles. So basically, they just give a test whether the law that is limiting the right to freedom of expression is justiciable. So one, it must be provided by law. So it must be enacted by parliament to say, hey, this is the law that we're setting to limit the right of freedom of expression. And it must be in pursuit of a legitimate aim, whether it's for national security, social order, public health, and so on. And then the third part, to test if the law itself is actually justiciable in limiting the right to freedom of expression, is whether it's necessary and proportional. And I think in my experience, whenever I'm applying this test to different legislation, both here in Lesotho and outside, whether it's regionally or internationally, they seem to fail the third leg of this test, whether this law is actually necessary to limit the right, and whether the penalties of limitations are actually proportional. That is, whether just looking at the law itself and balancing whether the harm it intends to prevent versus the harm it causes by restricting it is balanced. So usually this third leg of necessity and proportionality fails. And as we're seeing from, I think, what Madame Pascaline has sort of highlighted, is in practice, the state actor itself has been using these repressive laws to justify censorship and restrict information flow in Lesotho. And just, I think, maybe a few legislation and statutes that I want to highlight are mostly post-independent, so post-colonial. And one of them is the Penal Code of 2010, which was also amended in 2012. It actually enlists sedition and offenses against the royal family. And I think sedition in itself, the way it is defined in the Penal Code, as well as the Sedition Act, I didn't mention it in this slide. It's also in 1968 Act, I do believe. It has a very repressive impact in terms of covering, publishing sentiments or media coverage when it comes to acts of the government. And then the internal security itself, usually same, the legitimate aim it purports to say it's pursuing is national security. But we're seeing again a lot of times, in as much as the aim might be legitimate, the harm it causes is not necessary, or it's not even proportional in terms of its penalties. The Official Secrets Act, it's also very restricting when it comes to free information flow, particularly on information that we might consider as information that is in the public interest. So it also just has that impact of just criminalizing the conduct itself of both the the person who discloses, or the whistleblower of the information, and the third party on the end who publishes the information. And then we also have our Criminal Procedure and Evidence Act of 81, which also is also problematic in its own way, because it threatens the press in terms of weaponizing the force of disclosure of sources and evidence. And the Printing and Publishing Act as well, which also bans content endangering, quote unquote, public safety as a legitimate aim. But also in itself, it's also very problematic, because, like I said, usually whenever, these provisions have, well, as of late, they haven't been used for prosecution purposes, but because of their existence, they do pose a threat to a great extent. And they do fail the third leg of that test that I spoke about earlier in terms of necessity. Is it necessary? Yes, they are pursuing a legitimate aid, but in terms of necessity and proportionality of the penalties that they actually give out is a different question that actually poses a great threat. And maybe I think one looming threat, because technology has been fast approaching development and been the most source of information flow and exchange, is the Computers Crime and Cybersecurity Bill, which has been shuffled back and forth between the committees and the Houses of Parliament. And I think the last draft that was shared with me was the 2024 draft. So the bill itself, we applauded for some of its progressive provisions in terms of criminalizing things like xenophobia online, as well as xenophobia. What else? LGBTIQ hate speech and other things, but it also poses other dangers, specifically when it comes to media freedom and freedom of speech. So one, because what is important with media or press is that element of exchange of information and actually putting the information out in the public domain. So the data required is is very integral in that aspect, and it actually penalizes data interferences and actually makes data espionage a criminal offense, and also unsolicited messages a criminal offense. And it also has very, very problematic penalties, which aren't necessarily proportional, objectively speaking, because as you can see, it poses monetary as well as jail imprisonment of very, very questionable terms and amounts, like 5 million, 10 years, 17 years. And these on their own are pose a threat to people who are actually in the profession, who would actually be that everyday conduct within the sector itself require exchange of information, access to data. I think moving on, what we're also seeing in terms of the legal framework in Lesotho particularly is the lack of other existing legislative frameworks, particularly on access to information, both within the government institution and department itself, which the bill would govern, and also access to such things by third party or private citizens or non-state actors themselves. So it has been stuck and it hasn't been passed. I believe the last draft was in 2021. So it's roughly been over 5 years with that bill having not moved a single inch to be enacted into law. And like Owen had earlier said, that Lesotho is actually among a few countries that actually do not have an existing legal framework when it comes to access of information laws, as well as the cybersecurity, because a lot of countries, especially in the region, have been moving to enact these laws. And I think what are the most active barriers currently is the Official Secrets Act, which sort of like has this blanket ban on disclosure of fundamental information, which usually 10 out of 10 times it's because the information is in the public interest. It's not because the information is for the sake of publishing or dissemination, and that there's no security classification for such information to say, hey, we have this internal policy to say this is the information that is required, and this is that is restricted, and this is the criteria that it meets, and this is the justiciability of it being limited to being shared into the public domain, even though to a certain extent it might be to in the best interest of the public for it to be shared with the public, maybe whether it's to for public discourse or just for the note of the public, because it's in it follows the principle of good governance for the people who voted government into power to have access to such information and to have proper discourse. And we can only have such discourse and full and meaningful participation when we have access to such information. And we've also seen some litigation trends which are very, very concerning, which were also highlighted in the report itself. And I think Madame Pascalinah actually highlighted a few in her discussion earlier, such as the Majors investigation investment managers case, which was filed after the tribunal, the tribunal newspaper actually exposed irregularities of the pension fund of civil servants here. And I mean, as a lawyer, I mean, when a matter is brought to court, but the trend of courts' willingness to actually accept um, these civil litigations before them with such exorbitant compensation requested in the pleadings, it does to a great extent sort of like deter um, journalists wanting to engage with exposing corruption. And we also have the Thabiso Moragai versus the Lesotho Times case as well, which also was related to a certain extent an expose of corruption, also requiring very exorbitant amounts of the media house, which is genuinely, if you are in the sector and you're thinking, is the story worth it? And if the courts do entertain because there isn't a framework to say this is the threshold and these are the guidelines for lawsuits to actually be entertained within the courts, then it poses as a big threat for censorship, for public participation, and even just civic discourse, I guess, around corruption within government institutions. And I think I also wanted to highlight that, the existence of these laws just goes beyond the media. And once the media strength and foundation is shaken, it easily spills over into activism and civil society. And now we're seeing civil society is also, to a great extent, shrinking. And if these laws are not remedied, repealed, or amended appropriately, that is what we're going to continue to see. Self-censorship within journalism itself, and also civic space shrinking. I highlighted that one activist was also charged with sedition over his views and opinions that he shared on social media. But also, there was also another case where the DCO, which is a government branch on economic offenses, wrongfully arrested an editor of a local newspaper, but also later admitted, but also that was because there was momentum that was caught within the public that this has been happening, and then they had to admit that the arrest was baseless and wrongful. And it's just these sort of things that actually make you see that the existing laws do cause a problem. Even the existing government institutions, they rely on these problematic laws to act wrongfully and censor journalists in their work. And I guess one thing that we've seen is the amendment of the Penal Code. And in as much as it was progressive in terms that it established the media council and other things, it has its shortfalls in a certain to a great extent, because procedurally it does have certain flaws that would need to be remedied. But again, like I'm saying, the laws themselves are very problematic in their phrasing, in their vagueness and their wide blanket coverage, and they pose a great threat. And then we also have entities that are enforcement laws that also add another layer to the threats. For example, the LCA is an established the Lesotho Communication Authority, established by law in 2000 by the Lesotho Communications Authority Act. And the main duty is to govern licensing and operations of media franchises, even telecommunications entities as well. And one of the issues that we're seeing from it is that it isn't entirely independent and autonomous. So it means there's a lot of political influence from the government and how it interferes in its duties in regulating the media houses. I'll keep referring to examples that the other panelist, Pascalinah, had actually referred to, that there was the 357 radio station was actually closed after one of the presenters had actually covered a story on his program about stolen firearms at a police station. And you sort of like see the politicization and how it flows from the government organ through the regulator and the impact it has on the right to freedom of expression, particularly when it relates to media and journalists. How many minutes do I have left, Owen? I'm really trying not to take much time. And then I sort of like.
Okay, can you round up? Can we say 2 minutes? Is that fine?
Of course. But
All right.
yes, yeah, let me, just 2 minutes is enough and I'll be done. But then with regard to the enforcement issues, like I'm saying, that they add a layer of threat. And we have this DCO, which actually was detaining an editor of a local newspaper after an expose implicating corruption. And then is the police themselves using these laws as a ground of foundation to actually assert, these arbitrary and wrongful arrests. And then the courts themselves, I mean, there is a layer to it, but the impunity of actually addressing issues when it comes to uh, offenses against journalists themselves, or litigation brought against media houses themselves, is another layer that actually makes us want to question how do we actually remedy these to ensure that media is freedom of media is not stifled to the extent that it has. And these are the recommendations that I would make, particularly to the state, is, we definitely need the access to information bill to be passed
Sorry,
with
Advocate.
urgency. Yes.
Sorry, Advocate. We want to deal with recommendations, the way forward, as we wrap up when we're looking.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay. No.
maybe we can hold on to that one a bit.
Okay, no problem. Then I think that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, Owen. I will listen to my co-panelists and then wait for any questions or comments from the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Advocate, for the detailed presentation. I feel now with all this knowledge, I can stand anywhere and speak about the media laws in Lesotho and how they're impacting journalism and also civil society activities. And I know we have Selloane from MISA, and I know MISA has been actively involved in lobbying against some of these laws. We also have, I see Kananelo, who was also MISA Lesotho chairperson. I see him among the participants here. Can you briefly maybe explain what has been done, what activities have been done to challenge these laws, the advocacy around these laws, and with what success? And I'll also ask Billy to speak because he's also an investigative journalist, and some of these laws militate against investigative journalism. Just to share your thoughts and the bottlenecks in terms of investigative journalism. So, Selloane and Kananelo, can I ask you to contribute?
Owen, Billy here.
Yeah,
I
Billy.
think
Yes.
while Selloane is preparing herself, I should have a go.
Yes,
Uh,
please do, Billy. Go ahead.
okay. I think what is also interesting with the approach that was taken by um, CSOs and media advocacy organizations and even media houses in Lesotho when we saw the attempt to promulgate the cybersecurity bill and computer crimes bill. This is a SADC model law, and it looked like the government was on a ticking boxes exercise when they attempted to engage or bring participation of the public into the process of promulgating this. But what was interesting is that it was at a time when there was an imminent election. So the collaboration amongst CSOs helped mount pressure on government and the parliament to the extent that the minister was forced to, that was in 2022, the government was forced to pull the bill from the floor of parliament and go back to the drawing board. But interestingly, we saw the next government after elections only just changing the date on the bill and the name of the minister on the bill. So, what has worked and what we're seeing work in terms of fighting back against this computer crimes and cybersecurity bill is collaboration amongst CSOs and the media and everyone coming together to see what impact it can have on access to information. Basically, the bill itself was going to criminalize journalism. Today, people access information digitally. It is so hard to even travel. So technology has made life easy. But what the bill was going to do is to criminalize the very enabling tool for us to access information. The fact that you would be getting a government document, like Pascalinah was saying, through a whistleblower was going to be criminal. And in the absence of a whistleblower protection law in Lesotho, in the absence of the access to information law in Lesotho, and also the existence of the laws the advocate spoke about, which criminalizes or can be used against any journalist or activist or civil society organization whenever the state agencies or the government of the day feels it is necessary because they believe that you're exposing whatever wrongdoing they are involved in. So we are in a time when we saw the need to work together. And that is what I think is the most important because the efforts towards advocating for the uh, access to information law has been going on for more than 2 decades. Yes, we have a national reforms process in place that is supposed to be uh, worked on by the country at a national level, supported by the European Union, supported by SADC. But what you see as very progressive laws being proposed in that reforms process, they are all put on hold because, for instance, we do not have a legally constituted body to drive the reforms at the moment. So everything that our government do, it is to get some political mileage, if I may put it that way. So for journalists, the environment is not enabling at all. Yes, journalists continuously put their lives at threat or under attack because we are doing our jobs because we love what we are doing. We want to see an impact on the ground. We want to change people's lives. But this goes as far as the next politician or the next person believes you are actually encroaching into their space and they want to retaliate. And they have an arsenal of laws and an environment that really makes it easy for them to retaliate against journalism. So we have very good progressive laws that are on hold, that are part of the national reforms. I'm speaking off the cuff because coming to hear the advocates speak of those laws and what Pascalinah have said, it makes me deviate from what I wanted to present and say, we have this progressive things that the reforms are proposing. But as it is, we have a prime minister who just came back from SADC to tell them that the national reforms have been, a certain fraction of the reforms have been concluded and remove Lesotho from a list of countries that are on SADC agenda. Because these reforms are going to create an enabling environment for democracy to thrive. But interestingly, when he is back in Lesotho and he's supposed to put in place an office that will make sure that the reforms agenda is actually realized, he hasn't done that. We are now 10 months later. There is no office that is mandated legally, as the constitutional amendment that comes with the 10th Amendment of the Constitution says there should be an office that will now be working on the media council law, the different legislations that are supposed to be drafted and ensure that we can now realize many of the institutions that come with the constitutional reforms. So we work in an environment that really has its custodians working towards getting donor funding. If a funder says you have to do reforms on this, you'll get funding, they will do it. So as the matter stands, you would say that the greatest impediment against journalism, now coming directly to my bid as an investigative journalist, I would say we have very brave Basotho who are practicing as journalists. But one of the biggest problems they face is that routinely they have to expose corruption, abuse of power, procurement fraud, organized crime, environmental harm, even politically connected businesses and how they are abusing or capturing the state and using it for or to further their own private interest. But what is interesting is that these people go to work daily to fight against people who have money, political influence, state connections, access to security agencies, and even the legal environment that is infringing on journalism. However, with this high risks that exist, we still see journalists go out of their way to report news. And I don't know how we do it, but it is the environment that the advocate has painted. And we continuously publish stories across different media houses in the country, even though the landscape itself doesn't say it's not enabling enough for one to put their lives at risk, as we have seen. Thinking of cases of Lloyd Mutunga Miri, who was shot by security agencies of the state, it even becomes worse as any other attempt to expose wrongdoing within the army comes with a lot of pressure to say, what if they do to me what they did to Lloyd? One of the most topical issues around the army today concerns how soldiers who were deployed to Mozambique under SADC have questions around how they were compensated. Those that were injured in Mozambique, they have yet another case where they are saying they are questioning the compensation they received. So when you do deal with such stories, you wonder, am I going to fall victim to other soldiers being used by the army against me? So it is that kind of environment, but we continuously see journalists putting their lives at risk and publishing stories. So I think also to talk to one of the issues that are coming up, there is no, I think much of the dependence is on for trainings on surveillance, security, or personal safety. Journalists have to depend on the work that is being done by organizations like Intel Watch and others. If MISA is programming that is targeting or is able to find resources to bring trainers, then we can have such trainings. However, there is too limited resources for trainings of that nature that Brenna is talking to. And many journalists, especially those that are on desks that are political or looking at security issues, they really put their lives at risk, often than not. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think much of a lot that one wanted to say had already been talked to by the advocate and Pascalinah. I should leave the space for others.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Billy, and thanks for the bravery. I was reading your story on the compensation issues around the soldiers who were deployed in Mozambique. And yes, we can see that journalists in Lesotho continue to be brave even when their security is not guaranteed. And yes, a shooting like that we saw, the 2016 shooting, and also the 2020 of Lloyd Mutungamiri, and also the 2023 murder. It has a chilling effect on not just on journalists but also on society at large. So um, uh, we recommend the work that journalists are doing in the face, despite the challenges that they are facing. I don't know if MISA is ready to speak, because I know they were doing quite a lot of advocacy. Selloane, are you able to contribute now? Okay, maybe she's having maybe she's
Can you hear
having.
me?
Yes, we can. I can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nyakane, MISA Secretary General. Today, I will briefly explain what is the Cybersecurity Bill, highlight the concerns raised by MISA Lesotho, and discuss MISA's role in protecting journalists and promoting press freedom. The Cybersecurity Bill is a proposed law designed to protect computer systems, networks, and digital information from cyber threats and cybercrime. It aims to combat offenses such as hacking, cyber fraud, identity theft, cyberbullying, the unlawful sharing of intimate images, and other online crimes. Misunderstand that while these objectives are important and necessary, the bill must also protect constitutional rights, including freedom of expression, access to information, privacy, and media freedom, of which Ms. Pascalinah already shared that they are the threat to journalists here in Lesotho. Here at MISA, we also believe that some provisions of the bill are too broad and could unintentionally criminalize legitimate journalist work. Therefore, we have also looked at Section 21 of the Cyber Bill, which talks about illegal access. The term illegal access and lawful excuse are not clearly defined. Investigative journalists and whistleblowers acting in the public interest could be prosecuted because they are not protected in this law. So MISA proposed that journalism and whistleblowing be expressly protected. We also looked at Section 22, which talks of illegal remaining. The bill does not clearly explain what constitutes security measures or when someone unlawfully remains in a computer system. Therefore, here at MISA, we believe that that definition should be clearly defined. Also looking on Section 26 of the Cybersecurity Bill, data espionage, the profession could criminalize journalists and researchers who obtain protected information while exposing corruption and wrongdoing. Therefore, MISA recommends exceptions for journalism, research, and other legitimate public interest activities. We also looked at Section 33, which also talk about sending of intimate images. While protecting victims of non-consensual image sharing is important, the wording should also ensure that legitimate public interest journalism is not unintentionally criminalized. Also looking at Section 39 of the Cybersecurity Bill, disclosure of investigation details. The section could prevent journalists from reporting on matters under investigation because most of the time journalists should protect their source and also share information that is of public domain. Therefore, MISA recommends that journalism be excluded from liability and under the provision of that section and be removed. Also, looking at Section 43, which is publication of false information, MISA opposes this profession because it could reintroduce criminal sanctions for publication, despite the ruling by the Constitutional Court of Lesotho in the Wilson Petter case, which declared criminal defamation professions unconstitutional. MISA therefore recommends that this section be deleted too. Section 45, which is social engineering attacks, terms such as unlawful purpose and unauthorized access should be clearly defined to avoid affecting legitimate journalistic information gathering. MISA Lesotho works to promote and defend press freedom of expression and access to information, of which Mayor Pascalinah and Ntaote already noted that in Lesotho, access to information, we cannot access certain information because people hide it. We can only access information anytime it has leaked or otherwise. So here at MISA, we advocate for laws and that protect journalists rather than restrict them, monitor violations against media practitioners, provide support and representation where journalists' rights are threatened, and we engage government and other stakeholders to ensure that media laws comply with constitutional and international human rights. MISA also provides and promotes ethical journalism, professional development, and the safety and security of journalists. The new NGC, probably I have 3 months in office. So the new NGC has also proposed the establishment of mental health and free psychological support services for journalists, because we believe that journalists are constantly exposed to dramatic events, disturbing content, public pressure, and demanding deadlines. They process large volumes of sensitive information while working under stressful conditions. So therefore, access to professional counseling and mental health care can help journalists maintain their well-being, improve resilience, and continue serving the public effectively. In conclusion, MISA Lesotho supports efforts to strengthen cybersecurity and combat cybercrime. However, these efforts must not come at the expense of media freedom and constitutional rights. By revising the cybersecurity bill, clearly defining its profession and protecting journalists and whistleblowers acting in the public interest. With this being said, I would like to invite Nyakane because he has been part of the cybersecurity bill for the longest time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Yeah, we can see Mr. Lesotho is doing quite a lot there, and thank you for the advocacy work and the work that you are doing to make it easier for journalists to operate in a hostile environment. There was a colleague who wanted to speak.
Dad, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Please go ahead.
Greetings to everyone who has attended this important gathering. My name is Kananelo Burwezi. I'm the former chairperson of MISA Lesotho. I was deputy chairperson from 2020 to 2023, and then chairperson from 2023 to 28th of March 2026. I saw posts on various social media platforms and even in some WhatsApp groups advertising this important gathering, and I decided I should be part of this discussion, despite that it's on Thursday in the afternoon and I'm waiting for a newspaper that comes out on Friday. So that means today is my deadline. But
thank you so
under
much,
those circumstances, yes, even under those circumstances, I decided that I should be part of the discussion. Because I've been speaking on behalf of MISA for so many years, and now I enjoy listening to other people speaking. You learn so much when you just sit down and listen to your colleagues speak, especially when they have given you a platform for so many years to speak on their behalf. So for today, I was prepared to listen and not to speak. But since you have put me on the spotlight, I have no other option but to make my submissions or additions. I agree with everything that has been said by the previous speakers, including me Pascalinah, Advocate Sibongile, Comrade Billy, and me Selloane. There's so much work that has been done over the years, and most of the work was not done by MISA alone, but by MISA working together with other institutions such as MNN Center for Investigative Journalism. We worked closely together to oppose the enactment of the Computer Crimes and Cybersecurity Bill. And as Mr. Billy has indicated, it was withdrawn from the Parliament, largely due to the fact that MISA, MNN, and other CSOs, such as the Transformation Resource Center, stood firm and said, this bill is not going to see the light of the day as it is or in its current form. So one cannot even say anything apart from thanking MNN and TRC and other CSOs and other institutions that we work together with to ensure that that bill never passes. There are many other such laws, bad laws. I saw a list here of some dates as far back as 1940 something. They are bad laws, and very recently there was a gathering where they were trying to review some laws which they say have become maybe obsolete, but because that exercise is funded itself, and the funder has said, look into, for example, Lesotho Correctional Facility or Lesotho Correctional Services, look for laws that have to do with Lesotho Correctional Services that you think are old. Look for laws in the LGBTI space, women and children. Hannah, what's the other sector? And minority and vulnerable groups. So this review that has been done. Huh?
The disabled.
The disabled, yes, the disabled. So this review that has been done has sidelined the media because the funder was not interested in the media, but in other groups. So they are doing that review, but the media is not included. But we think maybe if they can do this review now meticulously, I think maybe the funder will say, okay, continue with the project and now look into some laws that have to do with the media. So we are currently at the mercy of the funder, but we also have to call on the government of Lesotho to do this exercise with local funds, because we pay taxes, Basotho pay taxes. We believe there's money to do this kind of things. It shouldn't always be that when we review our laws, we are funded by external stakeholders that don't even understand the issues that we deal with on a daily basis. On a daily basis, yes. So the government of Lesotho should fund the review of old laws. It shouldn't wait until the European Union decides it is going to give us money to do that exercise. Yes. And one other thing that I have to speak to, Ntaote Billy has talked about this. We are in the reform process that has started more than a decade ago, but there's nothing that we can say we have achieved with that process, largely because it is being funded, and those who fund the program, have their own timelines and deadlines. And we always work to impress the funder and not do things not do things properly. That has been the problem. And we saw in August last year, the Parliament passing the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, that they really mentioned here, that the Prime Minister went to the SADC summit, and then he was hugely congratulated for passing that amendment. But the amendment specifically mentions that there has to be a responsible authority that will ensure that the amendment is operationalized. And operationalizing the amendment includes having laws such as Media Council Act or Media Council Law. Almost 11 months later, after the amendment was passed, we still haven't seen that responsible authority. It is not there, even as we speak. Some people have reasoned that maybe there's no responsible authority because people like yourself, Kanane Robulwezi, have challenged the amendment. So how can the government now move forward with establishing the responsible authority while we have challenged the enactment of that amendment? It's a silly excuse, to be honest. It's a silly excuse because the government is implementing the amendment when it wants to. So if they have decided that they are going to implement certain parts of the amendment, they should not pick certain amendments and say, we're going to implement this one and not implement others. If they have decided that they are going to implement certain provisions of that amendment, I say they should implement everything, including establishing that responsible authority so that it can start drafting the Media Council bill, okay, so that the country can move forward. In a nutshell, this is all that I think I needed to say. Shooting from the hip. I saw a question asking whether it's a law reform commission that's undertaking this review of the laws. Yes, it's a law reform commission that is doing that task, but it is funded by the European Union. And we specifically asked the Law Reform Commission why these laws that we believe affect the media are not part of the laws that are being reviewed. And the response we got from them was that maybe in future they will consider reviewing both Seditions Act, Official Secrets Act, and other laws. Thanks.
Thank you so much, my brother. And as you were speaking and as other contributors were speaking, you can almost see a similarity with other laws throughout the region. The Official Secrets Act is also problematic in Zimbabwe, and these laws, which were enacted in the 1950s, the 1960s, colonial law eras, colonial law legislation, which was then inherited by governments and weaponized to even to fight journalism and so forth. But you might say you have succeeded, but the fact that the Computers Crime and Cybersecurity Bill had to be taken back because of the advocacy around work that MNN, MISA, and other partners were had embarked on shows that, you know, there's power in numbers. There's also power. There's power when people are united, and we will also need to speak about what space Interwatch can get into, what kind of partnerships. We've already done trainings with Lesotho journalists around issues to do with cybersecurity. Is there space? What are the needs and so forth? Where can we get in? But before we do that, we are going to go into that one shortly. The report also speaks about specific threats, that the gendered threats that are targeting female journalists, you know, including technology facilitated attacks and so forth. Let's speak about that as well, because it's also an area that is of interest to Interwatch, and I'm aware that we are also doing a report around those issues. Majirata, you haven't spoken. You are an investigative journalist, a hard-hitting female investigative journalist, and we've heard about all these laws that are in Lesotho. How are you managing as an investigative journalist first, and also as a female journalist in such an environment, hostile environment? And can you also touch on how other female journalists are surviving? Do we have cases of journalists, maybe female journalists pulling out or of journalism altogether because of attacks and because of the harsh climate? May you kindly speak about that and other issues, Majirata?
I am here, and I think I should speak of the video, because I realized that my internet is not stable where I am now, and maybe if I don't show face, maybe it will help at least to get good internet. The questions that you have posed to me are really important. Like, or maybe I should start by introducing myself. I'm Majirata Latela. I work for Lesotho News Agency. I'm an investigative journalist in Lesotho, a freelancer, a fixer, etc. So many journalists in Lesotho, especially women, face a lot of challenges when they do stories. I remember I did a report with MISA, and I had to interview some of the journalists here in Lesotho, and I realized that yes, many journalists here in Lesotho, especially women, face challenges, especially when they're doing stories, or intimidation when doing stories. And usually that is never looked at and or even get recognition or even spoken about. But these are things that intimidation is one of the biggest challenges that women in Lesotho get exposed to in different spheres of life. So in journalism, it's even difficult with now the laws that are present that we have, and those that have not yet been passed, like the cyber security bill. This bill is already challenging, as it has been said before, because for me, I have experienced intimidation in a form of my phone getting hacked. When I was working for one media house, I had some stories to do with where some people felt intimidated, and I would constantly have my phone hacked. Other than that, some women have shown that even on social media, they get intimidated, or even rather, some of them face get to people who even threaten their life. There's one journalist that I may not expose her name, who told me when doing the interview that she faced death threats because of one story that she was doing. And because in Lesotho here, the media doesn't even have enough money to even have the insurance or even have like something that can protect them. I don't know what can be, but we need something that can protect journalists other than insurance, maybe, that we can be able to say, I can be able to take this story, even though I know I'm facing these threats. Sometimes we just decide to do other stories because we feel threatened, we feel intimidated. And sometimes we have to censor, because some of the things you can't just put yourself at risk or even your family at risk. I remember I did this story with one of the freelance journalists. It was a story on sexual harassment at the factories. One of the results we got from that story is getting sued, and also our protagonist getting sued in that story, and having to look whether looking for to protect our protagonist and also protecting ourselves as journalists, because there was nowhere we could run to, because we didn't have in the country something to protect us. Yes, we have MISA, but MISA is more about freedom, fighting for freedom of expression, not basically to help us deal with the cases that we may have, or even pay for a good lawyer that can help us in fighting the cases. So sometimes, like I have said, we self-censor in some of the stories. We ended up changing that story and then looking for something lenient that is not going to put us in trouble after even the publisher declined the story, that showing that they cannot publish a story that that we have been sued. So being sued for defamation here in Lesotho is it's even challenging. You have seen when advocate shows how much we have to pay when we are charged of defamation. So it's very challenging for us to even go there and say we can try to do stories that we see that are very, very dangerous for us. We have families to protect. We have ourselves to protect. So sometimes as you just look at the prospect and say, no, I just can't put myself to risk at that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Majirata, and all other contributors. We need to round up, but before we do that, let's talk about the things that we can do going forward. What are the things that can be done? Is there room for advocacy? Is there room for partnerships? And what are the recommendations going forward? Like I mentioned before, we did a training, and I'm glad that some journalists who were part of this training, both in South Africa and in Lesotho, amongst those that are here. But perhaps there could be scope for some more training. Majirata spoke about the phones getting hacked and so forth. Those are the areas of interest specifically for Interwatch, areas around surveillance, areas around cyber security and so forth. What is happening in Lesotho around those issues, and where can Interwatch come in? What are the recommendations? This is, by the way, this is free for everyone. Maybe we can start with the advocate, your recommendations and where you think Interwatch can also come in. But everyone is free to contribute.
Many thanks again, Owen, and also to my fellow panelists and participants that have actually thrown in their ones and twos into the discussion. I think, well, at least from my presentation, my recommendations are, what would be your obvious recommendations in terms of enacting the necessary laws, repealing the problematic ones, as well as varying the bills to make sure that in compliance with not just international standards, but they recognize the threats and they balance the state interest as well as the public interest and the need for free media and just to promote the right to freedom of expression as a whole. I think the discussion, is sort of like obvious in terms of legal advocacy being one avenue that we could actually consider. But I also want to sort of like bring to everyone's attention another avenue that is underutilized, especially within Lesotho's legal landscape, is strategic litigation before different human rights mechanisms, whether it's within the African, the AU human rights mechanisms or internationally. So maybe we could consider litigating before the African Commission and just having a case that we could lodge with the commission that is specific on freedom of expression. I think maybe Internews could actually sort of like spearhead that as an international organization, and our participants and their experiences, they could scope out a case that would actually be a good case study to actually submit as a communication before the commission at the African Union level. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Advocate, for your contribution. And we're taking note, and we'll see if there are any areas that we can also chip in. But certainly, I know at Interwatch there's room for strategic litigation. I have some hands up, and maybe we'll speak in this order. The first one, Siabata, then Pascalinah, then Billy. Those are the hands that I see. If I've missed any other hands, please forgive me. I'll check. And yeah, so go ahead in that order.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Siavata Magwai. I sit here in Maseru, Lesotho. I currently serve as the Deputy Chairperson of Internet Society in Lesotho. We are currently running 2 projects, one on technology-facilitated gender-based violence. So I think that's where my interest came in when I saw this invitation. Now, I think my first question goes to Advocate Sibongile, just for clarity and in a simplified way, the explanation that she gave earlier on when she said the provisions of the Constitution lack one more leg. I think she mentioned 2 legs, and then she said there was the 3rd leg that it refuses to satisfy. So I just wanted her to explain in simple terms what she meant, even if it would mean her making an example for people who are not from the legal fraternity to be able to consume that content, because I found that very interesting, but I couldn't grasp the practicality of what she was referring to. The second issue goes to, I think, Majirata, because she was more to do with the protection of female journalists, or I think against harassment or something like that. If there are any cases that have been documented in that regard, and what, even if it's just generally, what the challenges are in that regard. But I think to all the presenters, I would love to hear more in terms of what are the practical examples of what could be done in order to offer protection and support. I know there was an issue raised around provision of psychosocial support, but I wanted to hear more in terms of what could be done to practically support our media in Lesotho. Thank you.
Thank you, Siabata. Maybe before they respond, can Pascalinah and Billy make their contributions? Then we'll ask the advocate and also Majirata to respond.
Thank you so much, Owen. I just want to touch on 2 issues or 3. The first one is on what could be done. So we've seen, as Billy and Kananelo have previously have said about the mobilization or the advocacy that we did as the media in Lesotho. I strongly believe that we are not doing enough in terms of advocating for what is right for us as the media, because of the 2 advocacy issues that we took on, first in 2022 and the second in 2023 or 4, around the Computer Crimes and Cybersecurity Bill. They were event-based. We were driven by the immediate danger that we foresaw. But the dangers are always around us. They are persistent. But our advocacy is mostly event-based. So I think what needs to be done now is for us to organize ourselves and ensure that periodically, maybe after every 3 months, we have issues that we want to drive advocacy around, whether it be gender-based violence against female journalists, whether it be digital security, whether it be legal security, that we need to do on a regular basis. But the shortfall is we are primarily journalists. We are not advocates or we are not trained in that regard. So maybe if you could get a little bit of how to go about with this advocacy, because I remember that when we did, I was one of the people that were at the forefront of the 2023 advocacy around the cybersecurity bill. We learned as we go about what we should be doing and what we should not be doing about getting the members of parliament, like the diplomacy and all that. So we really need help in that regard. The second that we need as the media in Lesotho is, Majirata has briefly touched on, is lack of a legal fund. So when the chips are down, the journalist is on their own. So that in itself, we need to have or set up a legal fund which will come in terms of trouble for a journalist. We have one journalist that has publicly shared her story, so I will share. She is Ntaote. Ntaote was sued for writing a story a few years ago, and she had to pay out of her own pocket to settle the matter out of court. So that is one practical example that we are saying. If we had a legal fund to defend media in Lesotho, or maybe have some sort of a contribution where media personalities would contribute maybe 50 maluti or 100 rand per month, and have a lawyer who is the friend of the media to come in times of trouble with that little money that it would have made, I think that would go a long way to give cushion to the work that we are doing, because as Majirata has rightly said, sometimes we have to self-censor and let go of very important stories, because the question remains, what happens if I personally get sued? Another avenue that I think we should explore is we need to have a reporting mechanism for female journalists that are being harassed, whether it be online reporting that is confidential, that has maybe some sort of a code without necessarily, because there are cases like in December 2025, I held a training for female journalists, safety training for female journalists. And the stories that we got from the female journalists, some being sexually harassed, and the perpetrators getting in touch with the editors to negotiate out of court settlement, like a handshake to say, I have forgiven you, is a cause for worry for me, that we have young journalists, that some of them, they have potential to become good investigative journalists, to practice public interest journalism, but they are facing serious challenges which might put them out of the practice. We have one journalist who shared during some of our meetings that I hate media even today because I was sexually harassed by a programs manager. I reported to an editor, and the editor did not do anything about that matter. And for that reason, I do not want to find myself practicing journalism. So those are some of the examples that we have on the ground of the silent sufferings of female journalists in Lesotho. Another issue that I think we need to tap into seriously is to have trainings on digital security. I think that one is paramount. That while I clap for Interwatch that we had a training in Joburg, and they came in Lesotho to do another one, but maybe persistently we need to have such trainings, maybe categorizing even online like this one, having those who are entering the space, the middle and the senior, in terms of what we are doing in journalism. So those would be my contributions. But I must indicate that while we applaud the government for undertaking the cybersecurity, the specific sections, the 6 specific sections that we have been constantly complaining about, we would not want that, because we know that when government goes silent, one day they will wake up, pull the bill, and say it is now going into parliament. And that is where consistent advocacy comes in now, that we should not rest and think that all is well because we advocated and they will not go ahead. We know that sometime late last year, there were talks that they are planning to revive the bill and take it to parliament again. So the consistency in our advocacy should not be as event-based as we have been doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pascalinah. Billy, you had your hand up. You can make your contribution.
Owen and colleagues, I do not think there's anything left behind now that Pascalinah has said what she has said. I agree to everything she's saying. I think to add to what she has said is that, yes, there's a dire need for continued advocacy work to be done on issues that affect the media space in Lesotho. I'm not sure how much resources can be available for such work to continuously be done. On the other hand, there's a need for maybe a new movement to be forged that would lead work around the welfare of journalists in the workplace, a union of some sort. It has been a struggle for a national union that is targeting everyone, not just female journalists, to be put in place in Lesotho. On the other hand, MISA is very far-stretched. Journalists have come to believe that MISA it's supposed to be a union, when the mandate of MISA has largely been advocacy for media freedom and doesn't deal with issues that go directly to what is the welfare of journalists in their media houses. That is the environment we have currently. For me, coming from a startup on investigative journalism, I would say we try to find resources to deal with some of the problems that we're facing. And we have been looking now to some of the things that Advocate Sibongile talked to, that is using strategic litigation. Whether we will have the resources to do so, or we will resort to using friends that are in the legal fraternity to help us deal with some of these things, is yet to be something that will clearly define. But we believe that journalists in Lesotho need to unite and have friends that are in the legal fraternity that can protect them and can go and appear before court anytime to protect their rights when they are infringed upon. And that needs to be organized. It needs somebody to coordinate such work. Secondly, or rather thirdly, the need for independent media is dire. While media houses may publish stories from time to time, often than not, they continuously get threats not to publish certain stories. And this is worrying because our landscape in Lesotho seems to be open from afar. But when you get very close to it and get to have conversations with people in these media houses, you'll see why a journalist from Lesotho Times or editor, that is Mahalinyana Pakela, was arrested by the anti-corruption. That is now run by a soldier and had his phones copied. It goes on to show that there's so much that needs to be done. That if a journalist's phone can be copied, so many people have been compromised. So many people who trusted the editor with their own safety and were whistleblowers and were providing information have been compromised. And we have let that die down. There's a need for us to do more work on media rights or journalist rights advocacy in Lesotho. What is also disturbing is that some of the actors that were leading civil society organizations have been absorbed by the government of Mr. Matekane. The government of the day today in Lesotho went out of its way to hire as advisors within the Prime Minister's office leaders of civil society movements. And that itself is seen today as one of the impediments towards citizens exercising their rights. You find such individuals now in the forefront of questioning people's rights to peaceful assembly when they go out to try to demonstrate. So it is a worrying development. We are yet to see how all this will play itself, but the environment is not enabling, and there is need for us to collaborate unite as a fraternity, and also work with those lawyers who are friends of the media. And in Parliament, like Pascalinah was saying, we need to forge relations with members of Parliament who are proponents of democracy, who understands the need for strong institutions and not strong men. If that is in place, we will have a base, and when Intel Watch comes and others to help us with resources, with skills, then we would have also done something on our end. Indeed, I've also taken part in the Intel Watch trainings when they came into Lesotho. What we are also doing currently is that we are trying to have a defenders network that is functional, and we are yet to see how that can work, but that we are doing. Currently, we are in the phase where we are supposed to be drafting a constitution for the defenders network. So we'll see what progress can be achieved in the next few months towards that. But on the other hand, there is need for more resources, as some of the work cannot be done without any resources. Like in its advocacy work, MISA needs more resources. We also at MNN have adopted a project where we are monitoring the enabling environment for civil society to operate in Lesotho. And we believe the work that we are doing under that program in reporting things that are negative and obstructing the environment, we are doing some work towards protecting journalists. But it is limited with limited resources. And we believe there is need for more to be done. So I think, yes, the strategic litigation one will do it. And we need to partner more with other CSOs and see that we are not just protecting other people's rights, but also our rights are also protected. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Billy. I can see Majirata, your hand is up. You'll be possibly our last speaker. But before we go there, colleagues have mentioned that there's a lot of self-censorship in Lesotho. You get a good story, a huge public interest story, but because you feel maybe you're under threat, or you feel that if they come for you, there's no one who stand with you at the end of the day. Maybe I would want to introduce what Interwatch is doing around that front, because this is common throughout the region. So we are introducing something called Unmuzzled, and Unmuzzled will be a platform where journalists can safely publish their stories, which they feel for one reason or another they can't publish in their own country because of the various threats that they face. So we'll be getting in touch with all of you here about Unmuzzled and the kind of stories that we would want published there. But it's basically the investigative stories, the public interest stories that for one reason or another you can't publish in your own country for security reasons and so forth. So Majirata, may you can you speak and tell us your and also speak about areas where you think maybe Interwatch can come in?
Okay. I would like to first answer Ntaote Seabata's question on whether we have journalists who have been documented talking about their incidences where they faced intimidation. Pascalinah has already mentioned one. And while doing the interviews for that report that I did with MISA, there were journalists that came and we talked about the intimidation that they faced. But they are not comfortable because they are not feeling safe to talk about those incidents. So I still believe there's something that needs to be done to make sure that we get them on board to be able to tell their stories so that we can be able to maybe capture those stories and have them documented somewhere to help us find ways in which we are going to help women in Lesotho. One thing that I'm thinking of, which can be done, that Interwatch can help us with currently, maybe in just a few months, not looking at the projects that may take long. I'm thinking that while we are looking at the cyber security bill, and we are waiting to see what the government will do with it, we can teach journalists about digital security. That's a very good thing that I have realized, that it can help a lot of journalists to protect their information, to protect their sources, and maybe protect their gadgets that they have, so that when anything happens, like the one that happened to our colleague from Lesotho Times, who was detained by the DCO, we can do a lot of things around digital security and making sure that our journalists here in Lesotho know the basics, at least the basics of how they can secure themselves on the internet, on their phones, and everywhere they can be. So that thing, I think it's very important for now. Another thing that you have said is this one, that where we can publish our stories. We just don't publish, we need funding to do those stories. If we can say, you have funding for us to do those stories, there are stories behind closed doors here in Lesotho that we are waiting to publish and to work on. The only thing we are lacking is funds to do those stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll let you know how Unmuzzled will work like, but of course, as we start, we're thinking about that component of paying for the research and what have you, because we know the expenses around basically coming up with the story, traveling, phone calls, and so forth, and yeah. So certainly, but we'll let everyone know. So, I want to thank everyone for participating in this. It has been a good program, and I want to thank the presenters for articulating the issues so well. And I see we have hands. Yes. The advocate, there was a question for you, which I think went unanswered. Yeah, so maybe let's allow the advocate to speak and round up.
Yes, Owen, thank you. I thought you might close before I actually address that question that I thought was very important. That Ntaote Makwai actually asked. I think maybe just to put it in a simpler term, the test that I was referring to, it comes from an international standard. I think I brought it in because a lot of times I think we have an understanding that rights are absolute and they shouldn't be limited. So when someone would read Article 14, subsection 2, that limits the right to freedom of expression, it does give up the impression as if, oh, the government is giving me the right to freedom of expression, but also taking it on the other hand. But that is not the case. We're saying, yes, it can be limited, but these are the safeguards to limiting the right. So it's that three-tiered test of it should be promulgated by law, that it should be in pursuit of a legitimate aim, and it must be absolutely necessary. And if it has penalties, they must be proportional. So I think just an example, if we were to take the Computer Crimes and Cybersecurity bill, if we were to test it under that tripartite test, is it provided by law? If it would be enacted into law, we would say it meets this first leg. The second one, is it in pursuit of a legitimate aim, which is regulating the digital space to make sure that there's a balance? Yes, to a certain extent, it is in pursuit of a legitimate aim. But also, is it necessary? Now, if we were to take specific provisions and the penalties that they have. For example, I think it's section 26 that makes a criminal offense to receive quote unquote confidential information without prior quote unquote authorization, right? Already just the wording of that provision itself, because it's very vague and broad, is problematic. So we can't really say to a great extent, is it necessary to say someone cannot send out information or even receive information because it's very vague. So the element of necessity, it does not meet it because it's just vague and doesn't meet that leg. Also, then the penalty of the years, are they proportional? Is it proportional for someone if I, Sibongile Mokapane, was to send you information about state activities or activities about the government, the administrative arm of the government, without authorization, for us to both be criminally, liable, persecuted, and sentenced to between 5 and 10 years for transmitting such information, or being penalized for millions for such conduct. It already does not meet that leg of proportionality. So it is a problem. So it is that is the international standard set in terms of testing whether the limitation that the law imposes is justiciable to a certain extent. I think hopefully that sort of like clears the question that Ntaote Maguire has. But also I think just maybe in closing, I would just like to commend the initiative on technology facilitated gender-based violence, which we're already, like I'm gathering from the discussions that we've been having today, that the gendered element of the sector itself is also quite problematic. And I think also what I'm noting is the interrelatedness of violence against female journalists. Particularly, I've seen the weaponization of their sexuality, well, from experience and observation, when they're covering very polarized topics, as well as during, critical times, such as elections or during COVID. You see that whenever female journalists are covering these themes or topics, there's that element of attacking them. And even if it's a topic that is necessary to be discussed, but the criticism of the stories that they cover and the views and opinions that they express in their pieces, the attack isn't on the substantive matter of the topic itself. The attack is always sexualized. And I will say that is also speaking in terms of how we also regulate free expression and meaningful public participation in such discourses, but in a way that also safeguards the integrity and dignity of the people that are covering this stories. I mean, we already have an existing legislation, which is the Counter Domestic Violence Act, and I think it's Section 13K that just sort of like as a by the by, because it was an exercise to tick another box. It does address and makes provision for technology facilitated gender-based violence, but because it's so compound and abstract, even in that provision, it doesn't necessarily cover or give acknowledge to how wide and broad that the misconduct of technology facilitated gender-based violence is, and how it manifests for different individuals, vulnerable groups, even within different sectors. So Ntaote Maguire, that is just me saying to you in your work, congratulations, but maybe we are looking up to you to actually propel the conversation and inspire, normative frameworks, particularly policies or, even legislation to actually amend this provision to actually have that gendered lens and intersectional approach to how women experience the digital space. Thank you very much, Owen.
Thank you so much, Advocate. And This has been wonderful. The participants had rich presentations, and I feel like if I'm even put on a platform to speak about the state of the media in Lesotho, I'll make a useful contribution. But thank you. But this is we are hoping at Interwatch it's not just talk. We really want to take this forward, maybe in terms of advocacy, in terms of trainings, partnerships, strategic litigation, joint, yeah. So we will be in touch even with our panelists to see the way forward. We'll also sit down as an organization to review this webinar and see possible areas where we can chip in. We were listening and we've heard about the need for continuous training around issues to do with surveillance, cybersecurity, and even physical security. And we are also interested in those kind of areas. So I just want to thank everyone who participated, who sat in, who contributed, who had time to listen. Thank you so much. This is much, much appreciated. Thank you, guys. We'll meet next week. We'll be in Eswatini, basically speaking about the same media threats.
Thank
and
you,
all of
Owen.
us are invited. Thank you, Billy. It's nice seeing you, man.
Hey, guys.
Cheers, Pascalinah. Thank you so much.